The URL parameters listener is an extremely powerful listener that automatically waits for query strings to appear in the user's URL, parses that information, and pushes it into the data layer where it becomes available for you to do a number of really cool things. Once we enable the listener, we'll jump to features. And we'll first take a look at the URL parameter activity features. These are the features that push information into the data layer. And we're going to enable capture URL parameters. What this will do is automatically parse the URL parameter information and push it into this section called URL automatic values. And each query string will be separated out with its value so you can target it. Now, in addition, there's a feature called custom data layer values, which allows you to write rules that will actually push custom information into the data layer based on the activity in the URL parameters as well as on the website. This will be pushed into a section called URL custom values, which actually appears inside of the capture parameters data layer activity. You can see it down here. Now, one of the most powerful things you can do with URL parameters is actually store them in the browser so that they persist over time. ListenLayer allows this with the browser storage feature. You can write rules to save either the direct information from the data layer, or even you can customize that information and push it into cookies, local storage, and session storage. Once it's in browser storage, you're actually able to retrieve it at a future data layer event. So you could push it back into the data layer, for example, when a form is submitted. And you could then capture that information so you actually know the parameters or information from the user's history once they become a lead. You can even, in some of our form listeners, you can actually populate hidden fields with information from browser storage. So you can imagine how powerful that can be when you can capture information from the parameter and you can actually from the URL parameters, and you can actually store it in the browser and then retrieve it later. Now, data layer monitoring allows us to write rules to be notified when certain activity occurs in our data layer or does not occur. And then data layer reporting tracks information and activity from the URL parameters listener over time for debug reporting as well as just other reporting needs. Now, this listener has an advanced feature that requires some additional script placement. You can place this script above the Google Tag Manager container, and it will parse the URL parameter information and put it into the data layer before the actual GTM container loads, or before the page view event, which allows it to become available to that page view event if you need to use it immediately. Now, please note that if you turn on, or if you place that script, you don't actually have to turn on any events inside of ListenLayer. The URL parameters before event will automatically fire, and we'll take a look at that. Now, we're going to make sure that our capture parameters feature is enabled, and we're going to publish our changes. And then we're going to jump to our website here. We have the Google Tag Manager debug window open. And I'm just going to go ahead and give this a hard refresh just to ensure that we have the latest changes from ListenLayer. Okay. Now, let's take a look at our debug window. So the first thing we'll notice that we have our ListenLayer script running. It's loading on all pages of the website. And I'm actually going to visit a URL that contains URL parameters that are common. And then we'll jump back to our debug view. Now what we'll see is that the URL parameters listener has pushed an event. We can take a look at that data layer activity, and you can see under parameters here that the information from my parameter has been completely parsed out. And so now I can actually register one of these variables or all these variables in Google Tag Manager and do something with it. And notice that we have no custom values at this point because we have not turned on the custom data layer values feature and written rules for that. But do note that the URL parameters before event is pushing into the data layer, and that's because we have the script placed, the advanced script here, placed above our GTM container on our website. And you can notice that the container loaded, which is the actual page view event, is occurring after the URL parameters before activity, which means that any variables here can become available to Google Tag Manager if we need them right away. Now, again, the unfortunate thing is that we cannot write rules to customize this data layer activity. And so, unfortunately, we just have to use the raw information coming in on the URL. So that's a summary of the URL parameters listener. I'd recommend diving in and testing out some of the features, including this capture parameters feature. And let us know some of the cool things that you build with ListenLayer.